Hi, good morning, buenos dias. I'm Vanessa Falconorta, Faculty Director for the Cross-Cultural Center here at San Diego State University, Imperial Valley. And today we have the great honor to feature Kay Rufai. So before knowing more about our guest today, let's learn a little bit about what is the Empoderación en Educación project, the Empowerment in Education project behind our speaker series celebrating Black excellence in education. So the Empoderación en Educación, Empowerment in Education, is dedicated to amplifying the stories of our of scholars, artists, activists who are dedicated to the social justice of underserved communities, sometimes communities that we often don't read about or hear about in the media. And that is our Empoderación en Educación project. Now, specifically, our Black Excellence in Education. Our Black Excellence in Education project is centered on Black scholars who are dedicated to the success of Black students from K through 12, post-secondary and higher education. So that is our Black Excellence in Education, starting during Black History Month, but continuing on to Women's History Month as well. So that's a little bit about our project. So before we begin, let me go ahead and pin our speaker and myself as well. So we are here. Excellent. Wonderful. So now about our speakers. So with no further ado, let me go ahead and get it started. And I think, Kay, if you could help us to share your screen so we have that as the main focus for our visual.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, so just a little bit about Kay Rufai. So I had the great honor about learning about Kay Rufai's work through the ADA project in San Diego. He was a visiting scholar artist at the time. I think this was already a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And ever since I followed Kay's work, Black Boy Joy, online, and just learning more about his social justice efforts through art and photography. So that's a little bit about how I had the great pleasure and honor of meeting Kay Rufai, but also just for our community, who is Kay Rufai? So Kay Rufai is a photographer, poet, filmmaker, author, mental health researcher, and founder of the internationally acclaimed S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys project. He is currently the first artist in residence for West Midlands Police Artist as part of the Coventry City of Culture, using creative arts to improve relationships between police and marginalized youth people. His work spans for the past 8 years in a handful of countries, including the UK, USA, Ethiopia, Bhutan, Germany, Scandinavia, Mexico, Nigeria, and Colombia. His work explores themes of masculinity, identity, mental health, a series of youth violence and community cohesion through art, photography, educational workshops, residencies, trainings, and public events. A great deal of his work has directly engaged diverse communities, young people in custody, at-risk youth, refugee, and displaced groups of people, as well as working collaboratively to create bodies of work with them. He has received numerous accolades from his research-led series of workshops and exhibitions across the country. His work has been exhibited at the Barbican City, the Tower Bridge, Royal Court, and the Battersea Art Center. His award-winning project has been featured in The Guardian, Channel 5 News, The Voice, and the BBC. So that is who Kay Rufai, a little bit more about Rufai. Also for our audience, I just want to say that you're more than welcome to tune in regards to maybe addressing questions or comments in the chat box, and I'll be very happy to relay your insights in our session here. But with no further ado, we now open up the floor to our guest speaker, Rufai.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for the beautiful introduction. So lovely to meet all of you. As introduced, my name is Adekunle Rufai. I'm a Nigerian, British artist, and based predominantly have been in the UK, and a lot of the work that I do, as Vanessa mentioned, kind of spans across various art mediums. But I guess today I'm going to kind of share specifically around the themes of how my work seeks to, continually pose the question about humanization of Black boys and how that really kind of permeates through a lot of various systems that we kind of engage with in our society. So I'm going to just kind of share a lot about, I guess, the story of why my work has led me to where I'm at as an artist. So as I highlighted, I'm first generation Nigerian British. Went to university to study, university, I guess, college in the context of the Americas, to study biomedical engineering, which is what my mother wanted me to study, and ultimately wasn't something that really gave me the freedom to explore what it is that my kind of natural inclinations were, which was autistic. And then I guess I dropped out of that and then really started to kind of pursue the arts, because I kind of grew up on 3 continents, but really, understanding like the experiences of Black boys and Black masculinity is not a monolith, and really started to really dig into that through creative tools. So a lot of my work in the last 6-7 years is really about kind of challenging the stereotypes associated with Black boys, and using visual medium as a kind of conduit for people to engage with that in their kind of everyday lives. And a lot of my work really then uses that as an extension to really critique systems, and not only just critique systems, because I think there's something about the way that I choose to work, which is not to stand on the outside and talk about what we are displeased about, which I think there is a powerful element to that when we think about activism and how that works. But for me, I think when I think about change, my real kind of medium of change is through the inside, and really figuring out how can we do that. So that comes from the education system. I don't stand on the outside and think I know all these things and all these ills about the education system, but actually to not be in the education system in the capacity that I can to really try and really create an autonomous reshaping of that within the school, where the kids and the children's voices also form part of a system that brings about the change. Similarly with the police force in the UK, a lot of my work as an abolitionist is really trying to figure out that as the systems currently do exist, we know they don't serve people that look like me, look like, people from underserved global majority communities. So actually working to really shift the infrastructure as it is right now to really create a safe, and what safe does mean when we think about, the policing relationships that exist with communities like ours. So a lot of my work is really trying to challenge and shift that ultimately through working on the inside to really do that through various practices. So as highlighted before, I'm already an artist in residence, which has never been done before. So that's something that I created specifically based on kind of my own politics to really think about how we can really shift the actual structures of policing that exist in this particular parts of the UK in that particular context. I'm going to share a little bit more about that work, and perhaps a little bit more about some of the kind of findings from that work and what the artistic prompts that have come as a result of that particular residency, and what that has really done to really shift outcomes tangibly. So very quickly, I'm just going to start with just getting a tiny bit of interaction going. So the first question is, looking at this collage of images, I would love to hear, what do we think these people all have in common? Any ideas? So just please share your thoughts in the comment box. And as Vanessa highlighted, she would then perhaps relay that. And if anyone particularly feels also like they want to get on audio or camera just to share what it is that they feel, also do feel free to do that. But yes, I think for ease, it might be better to just put that in the chat box. They all seem happy. Thank you, Christy. What else? Any others? What they all share in common. So we see happy and the smile. Thank you. Yeah, those seem very happy and colorful. Cool. So yes, absolutely. These are strangers. I've never met them before. And I approached them on the streets and asked them two simple questions. The first question is what makes them smile? And the second question is what would make them smile more if they had the power to make that happen. And I photographed them and I share those images with the world to really, I guess, help us challenge what we think makes a person who's got their hair dyed yellow would smile like, or potentially a Sikh Indian man or a gay Chinese man, what we perceive makes that person smile, and ultimately challenge what perhaps our perceptions tell us. So that was the project. But now I'm going to get you to think about what you think makes these people smile. So I'm going to create just give you a selection of some of these individuals, and then you get to tell me what comes to your mind. So do not give me your woke responses, please. Just give me the first thing that comes to mind, and then we shall perhaps kind of unpick some of those. So very quickly, this individual, what makes him smile? So please, your thoughts as they come. Your uncensored thoughts, please, would be absolutely appreciated. So yes, what are the first thoughts that come to our mind when we see this individual, when we think about what makes him smile? We see a nice word, somebody said, a nice word makes them smile. What else? What else do we think makes them smile? Any other suggestions? Friendship, we have friendship, thank you for sharing that. What else do we perhaps perceive? A smile back, a compliment, music. Okay. All right. Well, the answer is seeing little dogs. Who is surprised by that? Anyone care to share whether that surprised them or that's consistent with what perhaps you thought? Anyone surprised? A good thumbs up in the chat or whatnot would be a good indication to know who was surprised. Well, everyone likes cute dogs. Well, that's good to hear. Surprised me because they seem tough. Thank you so much, Christy, for sharing that honest response. And that's really interesting because, again, the question that comes to my mind when I think about that response is, does toughness and loving dogs, are they mutually exclusive, right? And this idea, whatever it is we perceive to be tough, right? And our kind of projection of what that then means about a person's way of life, what they love and what they don't love, and also what does it mean to be tough, right? And so thank you so much, Christy, for sharing that. And somebody else said they never thought that they would like little dogs. So I asked again the next question, what will make you smile even more? And he says, to be consistent, he says, seeing more and more puppies around the city. That's what makes him smile. Next person, what do we think makes her smile? Any guesses, please? Somebody say more dogs? Flowers. Somebody says flowers. Very interesting. Flowers, sunny days. What else? Music. Okay. Any others before we move on? Maybe she's with her friends. Okay. Thank you for sharing those. And her response is watching and enjoying a football game. Who is surprised by that? Anyone? Is anyone surprised by that? Is that consistent with what you would imagine that she would smile about? Anyone? Any thoughts? Just again, some of these questions are rhetorical. It'd be great if you obviously respond with a thumbs up, and some people that are much more confident to share, please do that. Someone says, I'm not surprised because everyone loves football. Does everyone love football? I just cannot believe it. Somebody says American football or soccer. Good question. Either, which would surprise you. But in this particular case, she's talking about soccer. And I guess the real question is, earlier when I asked what makes her smile, somebody says flowers, which is beautiful. But I wonder whether when we speak to ourselves and introspectively explore, whether because of her gender, that also informed what we thought would have made her smile. Again, the fact that she's visibly wearing a hijab, did that inform what we think she's more likely to smile about or not smile about? And ultimately, obviously, seeing that she shared that she smiles when she watches the football game, in this case, soccer. Does that shift our perception of her? And do we see people like her watching soccer? And what is it about the actual infrastructure and environment of soccer that perhaps maybe doesn't actually allow her to feel safe in that space? So a lot of questions come up when I hear, and when I heard her response when I asked her that. And ultimately, I guess I'm inviting you to have similar questions in yourself when you kind of engage with that. And obviously I asked her what more will make her smile if she can make that happen. And she says having more time to do things that she loves. And I think this will probably be the final one. What do you think makes him smile? Please share your thoughts. No woke answers, please. Music, mom, smelling food around the streets, good action. What else have we got? Art, he seems artsy. Soccer, okay. Thank you for sharing. Doing yoga and people with nice drip. I mean, if I will contextualize the colloquialism of that from a like London slang perspective, nice drip means having nice fits. So I guess the first part particularly, maybe, who is surprised about the fact that this Black man particularly shared that doing yoga makes him smile? Is anyone surprised by that? Does that seem like what you had perhaps expected? It'd be great to hear and to see if anyone was surprised by that particularly. So Black man in a hoodie, some gold tooth. Did not expect that. Thank you, Gilberto, for sharing that openly and honestly. Really value that. Yoga, yes, surprised. Nice drip, not surprised. Okay, all right. Again, it would be really interesting for us to interrogate what are the things that perhaps posit our kind of thinking when we think of who is more likely to enjoy yoga. When we think about yoga ads, I'm sure we can all agree that this is not the kind of face we see when we think about yoga ads and, ads for Lululemon and brands of that nature. We tend to see middle-class white women carrying their mats when we think about who enjoys yoga. But again, it's like really thinking about what freedom do we create in our minds for people who are outside of that bracket to also enjoy yoga, and actually does that sit within our subconscious or conscious minds in the ways in which we look at that? And someone says he looks like someone that will do yoga, but I did not think about it. Really interesting. Thank you for sharing those. And I guess the follow-up question was, seeing more love shown between people from different backgrounds is what would make him smile. So another kind of provocation is, I want us to just share what are the first feelings that come to our mind when we see these images. It's very important for us to separate feelings and thoughts. So please, I would ask for your thoughts afterwards, but share with me first, what are your feelings of seeing these images on your screen? Sad, thank you, Gilberto, for sharing that. Sad is the first feeling that Gilberto feels. Anyone else? Oppression, sadness, thank you for sharing those as well. Any others? Sadness, oppression so far. Any other feelings that we experience seeing these images on our screen? Okay. Upset, thank you for sharing that. Angry, doubts, seriousness, thank you. And then what are some of our thoughts that kind of start to formulate after seeing these images in our mind? Any thoughts? Any things that we kind of, I fixated on those not making eye contact with the camera for some reason. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts that we had about seeing these images, perhaps thinking of what it is that these images are contextualized in? What is it that we think about what got them to this particular stage? What are the thoughts about what, these images are about? They look hurt from the inside. Youth. Okay, thank you for sharing those. And then conversely, what do we feel when we see these images? Pride, okay? happiness. So cute. Empowering. And what thoughts do we have when we see these images of smiling Black boys comparatively to the first images that I shared with the collage of men that look like a mugshot? So we have relief, empowering appears more than once. And therein, again, a closer look at these images. Therein lies, I guess, the entry point, the catalyst for me as to why I decided to create the project. So the S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys project is a project that was designed specifically in response to a need for this images of Black boys to replace the images of Black boys or Black men that I showed you initially. Because if we are going to ask ourselves very honestly and openly, which set of images are we more used to seeing when we think about Black boys and Black men in our society? Would it be these images or these images? And if we are very honest and we are really explorative of what we've been inundated with over our conscious adult lives, we would know that these perhaps images we would agree are the ones that we are more privy to in comparison to these ones. And therefore, for me as an artist who is of this community, who once was a young Black boy, and ultimately has spent the last 10 years working with young boys from underserved inner city communities with the intersection of poverty, race, class, we know that those layers of systemic kind of structures posit Black boys and brown kids as some of the most disproportionately affected. So for me, from that standpoint and through that lens of working, I realized that the systems that posit Black boys, particularly at the worst position, are not done through accident. The specifically curated images of Black boys that create these feelings that we shared before, sadness, seriousness. And on top of that, some words that perhaps some of us didn't share, which I know is absolutely associated with these images of Black men, is scary, it's dangerous, it's aggressive. All of these other words, which I'm sure are not alien to you when you've heard descriptions of Black men and Black boys, especially through the media and perhaps through various conversations with people who are perhaps not connected to these communities and look from a kind of voyeuristic kind of outlook. So for me, I wanted to really shift that. I wanted to shift what people are subconsciously fed of Black boys and Black men. Because when we think about the kind of statistics of stop and search and, obviously police brutality, we think about the images. If police officers have these images of Black boys in their mind, it's very unlikely that the statistics of police brutality and obviously subsequently police murders of Black boys and Black men after being in contact with police officers would not be as high as they currently are. Because if they saw Black boys like this, they would not immediately think that a young Black boy driving a car is more likely to be an aggressor, a drug dealer, a dangerous citizen of the society. And therefore, for me, those things are so connected, because the fact that Black boys are overwhelmingly more likely to be disproportionately excluded and expelled from schools in our current kind of society as we live in is also directly attached to the fact that educators and teachers, specifically white, and even more so in some cases, teachers of color as well, are subconsciously fed the narrative, which are kind of stemming from those first set of images that are shown to us about Black boys being aggressive, dangerous, more likely to be truant and disrupting of the educational system. So therefore, they're more likely to be given bigger and longer sanctions and much tougher sanctions. So for me, recognizing that these things are not by chance, these are specifically curated images that then reinforce the ways in which policies and systems then disproportionately posit Black boys at the bottom of the totem pole. So I wanted to create a project that spoke specifically to that by working with the young people first for 8 weeks. So I designed an 8-week program, which involved me traveling around to the top 5 happiest countries in the world to then extrapolate through ethnographic research what it means to create a project rooted in happiness. And then I used all of that kind of data and that ethnographic research to design a program that's rooted in creative arts. Because for me, creative arts was the most powerful tool for me as a young Black boy to navigate through my emotions and to understand how I understood the world. And ultimately recognizing that the way the education system is set up is not designed to cater for a multitude of learning styles and multiple learning needs, which perhaps are not necessarily within the structure of sit down and learn in a hierarchical structure of education. So I wanted to create something that was educative, but also allowed young Black boys the voice, the autonomy, the agency within the actual environment of education, where they can actually share and learn about how to express and explore their emotions. And then culminate the 8-week program in a moment where I then challenge them to show the world a version of themselves that is counter stereotypical. So in that vein, I'm just going to show you and play you a quick video of a young Black boy from Watts, which is the newest kind of export of the program. So I'm currently doing the program in Los Angeles, and this is the cohort in Watts. And this is the final session where I'm about to photograph this incredible young boy called JB. And I'm just gonna, I guess, give you a window into the process of what comes out through this final session after I photograph them, and then do a short interview with him. And I'm just gonna play that with you very quickly. Can we hear? Perfect.
Very emotional. Really helped me out. Like the way of releasing stress without going to the gym or like getting into a fight. It's a peaceful way of releasing stress.
That's incredible. What would you say you've learned about yourself since you've done these sessions?
I'm a very open guy, kind, and sometimes, might not be all the time, but if you look closely, I do show you true stuff sometimes. You gotta, it's like a rare gem you just found. You gotta wipe it off a little bit. You'll see it.
That's so beautiful. I love that analogy. What would you say you've enjoyed the most?
Getting to know everybody. Like, and not just like me and friend, hey. Nah, getting to know them on a deeper level, on a past friendship, more best friend type, family member, a part of the crew, like getting to really know something inside and out.
That's amazing. What would you say you're going to take from these sessions and applying in life after the session that comes to an end next week? Like, what are you going to be applying in your life on a regular basis for these sessions?
No matter what you do, what you say, someone's still gonna be hurting at the end of the day. So a good hug can help anybody out, no matter what they're going through. It shows that not only are they trying hard, but it shows that you care about what they're going through.
That's so beautiful. And the fact that there was only Black boys in the room, is that positive for you? Is it negative? Or did it not matter?
I feel like everybody should be open at least a little bit sometimes. So help everybody stop these fights and everything. So I said friendship is 10 times easier than fighting at the end of the day.
Thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to celebrate you just really. I don't know, maybe $50. Oh, what about you? How do you think I'm getting that?
I feel like it's because I participate, but at the same time, I feel like it's a goodbye gift. I don't want to say goodbye. So
Right, man, that's so sweet. Definitely participate, but not everybody gets $50. And not everybody gets a voucher either. Because not everybody completely, not everybody's been as invested as you have. You know, I think you've always shown your true self since you've come into the sessions. Like, you've been open, you've been honest, you've been vulnerable, you've been able to hold space for other people and listen. And I think it's such an incredible characteristic that I've seen you exhibit in the room. And I want to just show you that I've seen that, I value that about you, I'm inspired by you. You know, I wish I was like you when I was your age, you know, but I would be maybe alone. You know what I mean? But I love the way that you just are so proud of who you are. You are able to build your true self, like, you know, like in love animated, like in the animation, the fact that you're creating things with people like inspired. And I want you to always be like that, to never second guess who you are, to always be a version of yourself that I've seen in that room all the time. And I know you're capable of being that person, but I just wanted to remind you that I see that, and I want you to always be that. Okay? Really try to.
Thanks, Dan.
So much. All right, get the next person for me.
So that again was just like an insight into, again, the process behind the images, because I think there is a kind of a lure that people get from looking at the images in one dimension and think, oh, these images are really cute and they're really pretty, but actually to recognize that it's a culmination of a whole process of trust building. And obviously the whole program is 8 weeks long, and it's based upon 8 pillars of happiness, of which the first week is based upon trust. And then I'll kind of subsequently go through what the rest of the 8 pillars are and how that methodology helps create the outcomes of the work. And for me, I think one of the bigger things around my mission is, as this, you know, talk is aptly themed, you know, humanizing Black boys, and why that is, you know, important for us to restore the humanity that society, you know, projects onto Black boys. Is, you know, this clip I'm going to share as well right now will perhaps, you know, bring that home a little bit more, because there is a cage that Black boys are, and boys particularly, but particularly Black boys, when we think about the intersection of race, patriarchy, and ultimately, you know, how these systems intersect to really posit Black boys at disproportionately the most, I guess, unfavored, when we think about how, you know, trapped Black boys are in their masculinity and their ability to express themselves, and how this then directly has a link to violence and the inabilities for Black boys to express the range of emotions that they have the right to feel, and how then, you know, these systems posit them in a way that, you know, they end up expressing emotions like violence and anger as the only kind of real recognizable emotions that they have, and ultimately, obviously, the criminal justice system being there to snap them up whenever it is that they do that. So my work is really trying to then empower the Black boys to be able to have the tools to navigate their own emotions, and therefore be able to seek the kind of support that they need to be able to express and explore these emotions in a very healthy way. So therefore, violence doesn't end up being the only language that they have to express their emotions, and therefore allowing everybody around them, be it, you know, their parents and their extended parents, to really actually get to see the human in them by giving them the space to explore these range of emotions. So in the session that we have, which is around togetherness and belonging, we have these themes that we explore, and this is just an excerpt from that session, which I think really brings home this particular point.
You don't feel like as boys, you don't have the freedom
to actually have the opportunity to show love anymore. I feel like that's the thing now. If you show love, you have this like small opportunity of being categorized into some class or some system that there is.
Right.
Because it's like, you can be like giving your friend a crispy hug. They gonna think that shit good. They gonna think that shit fruity.
Right.
They gonna be like, if I gave Jaden a hug, like a full-on brotherly love hug, they gonna think it's good. That's not gay, bro. What are you talking about? Bro, it's categorized into some class or some society that's like, if it happens, and it's just like, because me and Jaden, we know each other. I've known that nigga since he came to school, right? I was there when that nigga got chipped. Saw that shit. Yeah. He got I've seen him when it's good, I've seen him when it's bad. I still want him to eat. That's the thing.
So I think that clip again brought home this moment where, you know, in this space that was created for safety, they were able to unshackle themselves from these strongholds of patriarchy, because he was articulating how difficult it is to be able to do that outside of the room, because everybody's perceptions of their sexuality, everybody's perceptions of their masculinity will be questioned. And ultimately, again, for me, one of the big things about this work is really empowering and creating spaces for Black boys to be able to unshackle themselves from the strongholds of patriarchy, which ultimately become their own policing mechanism for themselves and ultimately for other Black boys around them. And ultimately, this is then what posits Black boys in this space where society is enamored by the images of Black boys that reinforce the stereotypes of aggression and danger and all these other things that are not soft and are not expressive emotionally. So my work as an artist is then to proliferate images of Black boys like these ones in the newspapers, in the media, on billboards, in a way that actually starts to seep into the subconscious of the people that engage with these images. And my vision with the work that I do through S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys is to see these images of Black boys normalized. As we see images of Black boys and Black men as criminals being the normal, my mission is to kind of subvert that and really kind of displace those images in our subconscious minds. And a lot of the work that I do, obviously, is rooted in a lot of research, and obviously there are some quantitative and qualitative evidence based at the end of that. But for me, and for anyone that knows what it's like to work with people, you know, for me, these things are merely just numbers. And of course, some of them are quite impressive numbers, but for me, the biggest change is anecdotal. You know, what we see and what we hear, what we feel in a child or a person when they respond, particularly to a series of processes that's brought them, I guess, so much change, which sometimes data cannot capture. And for me, that's what I'm really drawn to as an artist. But we do have statistics and numbers. And again, through the work, you know, I put these images in multiple spaces that perhaps these boys don't even ever feel like they belong. So this is like equivalent of like the Capitol building in America, but this is, you know, the building in London where all the politicians make decisions about, you know, policies that affect these young people, but they're never present in there. And one of the kind of big missions for me was to kind of proliferate these space with the images of Black boys who people are speaking about. Another thing I wanted to share about this is just recognizing how, you know, the society is set up to not embrace images like this. You know, this was you know, online where this particular individual who had over 1 million followers, you know, saw these public installations of the images of Black boys, and their first response was, where are the white kids? And ultimately recognizing this, you know, not too different from, you know, white lives matter and all lives matter and all that kind of rhetoric, which is very synonymous to the American language. Recognizing that, you know, this to me was a reaffirmation of the fact that this goes against the status quo. Everybody is uncomfortable with images of Black boys that look like this. And ultimately, they're much more comfortable with images of Black boys that are more, you know, I guess, like the first kind of collage that I set up with you earlier, just to highlight, you know, how powerful it is to really try and politically shake the system through something that ultimately on the face of it is joyous, but actually for a lot of people, it's not joyous. And actually therein lies the kind of political radicality of the project in that way. And through my work, you know, I really try and bring these images to spaces where these boys would never imagine they would see themselves in large scale, you know, 2 meters, sometimes 3 meters, sometimes completely taking over a whole building, and really getting them to see themselves. And one of the kind of powerful things about this particular image for me is, imagine a world where this young girl grows up to see images of Black boys like this as the norm, and not currently how we have been socialized to see Black boys and Black men, and ultimately getting them to see themselves in places where they would never imagine themselves to be, in some of the kind of well-traversed parts of the city, where it's often, you know, huge kind of flocks of white people and policing of Black bodies in that space, and actually using this work as a radical kind of challenge to who belongs where, and having people engage with these images forcefully. And currently in LA, we've used this space as an opportunity to also kind of create healing spaces for Black men to really reconnect with the childlikeness that actually these images suggest through the kind of playfulness and joyousness of these images, and getting them to obviously come and see themselves, and actually see themselves in ways that perhaps they never imagined that they would ever see themselves, having them on billboards in their own communities and having people have positive associations with them. And what's really interesting, particularly about this image, is these set of boys, I invited them to come and see themselves after I put up these images of them in their community. And then there's a kind of convenience store next to this, and they went into that convenience store after, and they were not allowed to get into the convenience store, as for reasons that I'm sure we can all kind of guess, which is the fact that it's 8 Black boys, some of them 6 foot tall, dressed in what would be categorized as, gang member attire, which is ultimately just Black boys dressing up and expressing themselves. So the shopkeeper didn't allow them to get in because he felt like they were, probably going to rob the store or do something. So I went in after that, after they told me that. And then he said, "Oh, are those your images outside? Because I saw you putting those images up. I really love those images." And I was like, "Do you really love those images? Because the human beings that were in that image try to get into your store and you refuse them entry." And therein lies the juxtaposition that exists within the way that people engage with the images, because they're on the face of it very joyous and very disarming. But actually, the biggest challenge is to marry the feelings that people have when they see these images with the individual 3-dimensional version of a Black boy that's 6'5", and he might not look as welcoming when you see him because he has all these layers of things that society is throwing at him. But actually, for us to retain the same feeling of joyousness, the compassion, the grace that we give the images of the boys that's behind them, and ultimately try and marry that response and ultimately create a humanized kind of relationship with Black boys, even when perhaps they might not be smiling and you might not see them as people who perhaps are joyous from whatever kind of perceptions we uphold of what it means for Black people, Black boys to be joyous in the first place. So I guess I'm just going to kind of wrap this up with just sharing a little bit about what it is that the work that I do with the police is designed to do. So what I do is I work with young people who had direct experiences of the police, which is often negative, and then create a series with them to share what it is that those experiences have been, and then speak to particular officers across different ranks. So even from the most senior person in the police force all the way down to the person with the most the earliest recruit, and then make these kind of creative dialogue that would never happen in real time about the humanity that young person was stripped of in the engagement with the officer, and let the officer speak to the human in themselves as to what they did as a failing to that young person and what they should be doing differently to really bring change to that experience of young people like this particular young person. So this is a particular young person who spoke about the fact that his skin is perceived as a threat, and the way in which he navigates himself in the world is seen as a threat. He loves to play music and he carries his drumsticks around, and ultimately there's always an assumption when he's around with his drumstick that he's holding a weapon, and therefore that posits his relationship with police as a very aggressive one. And ultimately, one of the things he shared was the fact that, the trust is a two-way street. And ultimately, because there is a kind of template, a benchmark of him being distrustful as a Black boy, ultimately, it's very difficult for him to even perceive trust in the institution of policing, because that trust is not two-way in his instance. I will skip past the video. And this officer really had to speak about the fact that what he's experienced even in the force himself, hearing and seeing all these negative experiences that people have had, especially the fact that he's an officer of mixed heritage, talking about how he's witnessed these accounts of other officers like himself really kind of engage with people of Black heritage in that way, and ultimately recognizing that there's a lot that he needs to do personally in his role, because he's quite senior in the office, but also talking about how the system itself was the reason why he wanted to get in to change that, and actually really talking about how he's experienced mistaken identity even as an officer when he's not in uniform, and how that has ultimately also kind of made him understand ultimately just how deeply rooted a lot of the issues of policing is, and in this particular case, the commitment to really actually revamp the kind of processes that inform the stop and search policy. So that's something that's tangibly happened as a result of this. And a lot of these children that I worked with were then actually brought to the infrastructure of decision-making around the training process that needs to happen for police officers in their community around that. So a lot of my work is really steeped in kind of tangible outcomes, and really trying to use art as a conduit for these types of change to create humanized interactions with young Black people, particularly from systems that are not historically posited in that kind of way of engaging with young Black people. So I end all of that, and I would really love to kind of hear some of the questions or thoughts that any of you might have in response to the talk and some of the things I've shared about the work that my mission is rooted in. Thank you so much for being an incredible audience and for your kind of undivided, unwavering attention so far. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I just want to invite our audience for a virtual round of applause here. What a just empowering and compassionate session. So thank you for that. So we want to open up the floor now for questions from our audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box or simply unmute yourself. So we're opening up the floor now for questions. And I also have a few questions myself, but before asking, I do want to give the floor to the audience. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box or simply unmute yourself. So I have so many questions, just overall intrigued with this important and powerful and empowering work. One of my questions, as the audience questions trickle in, I'll ask one of my questions, which is, so you mentioned your methodology and the 8 pillars that make this work possible. And the first being trust. What are the other pillars? And then also, what is an ideal timeline? So for example, if maybe a school or organization would be interested in implementing and having you do this work, what would be like an ideal timeline to ensure the success of this project?
Thank you so much for those questions, Vanessa. So the 8 pillars of happiness are, so the first one being trust, the second is togetherness and belonging, which is the session where you saw the hug happen with those boys. And then the third session is money and wealth, or lack thereof, and how that shapes the experiences of young people living in marginalized communities. The fourth being freedom, the fifth being democracy and civil society, the sixth being health, that's physical and mental, the seventh being balance, and the eighth being purpose. So those are the 8 pillars of happiness. So each week is based upon those 8 pillars, and I use creative tools to unpick all of those themes. I give the young people cameras to go into their communities, to photograph places they trust and places they don't trust, and bring that back into the room. We annotate, discuss, debate that. We get them to really use photography and film as a conduit to express their emotions. In terms of timeline, so the program is 8 weeks long. I am relocating to LA in the next month or so, because I think, after kind of doing this first cohort in Watts, the hunger and the desire for this program to really be a kind of beacon of hope for some of the challenges that this city and the country generally is facing is so alive and it's so prevalent. So for me, I think there is a kind of desire to continually expand the program in California, or Los Angeles, particularly in this case. It's an 8-week program. The lead time to get that kind of ready and up and running is probably like, conversationally, probably like a month before, having all the logistics, the selection process of the students, and making sure all the infrastructure is set up for that. And then we have an 8-week program ready to run, which is usually once a week, couple of 2 hours minimum for the students. And then on the final day, which is like a whole day where I get to photograph them and do a field trip with them to take them somewhere locally to express and to experience art within a kind of art institution as well. So that's generally how the kind of process and the kind of program and methodology looks like in practice.
Wow, amazing. I can't wait to see the exhibition for that work.
Yes.
So questions from our audience. The first question that we have here in the chat box is from our student leader from the Empoderación Project, Isaac. And Isaac wants to know, as a current student leader and future educator, how could we incorporate your philosophy in our way to lead, to support this boys, I would say Black boys, during their time in school or even in academia?
Thank you so much, Isaac, for your question. I think it's a very powerful and pertinent question. So the methodology itself is one that can be, transposed into any kind of educational structure, because those 8 pillars are pillars that are used by the Happiness Research Institute to measure happiness across all human beings. So actually what that research brought to my understanding is that if every human being ranks highly in those 8 pillars of happiness, the chance and likelihood that that person would experience happiness in their life is very high. So recognizing that those kind of pillars can be used. So for example, the session around democracy and civil society, really that's about whose voice matters in the infrastructure of education. Understanding that the way education is set up, it's not set up for young people or any students' voices really to be part of the kind of collective decision-making. So first thing that we do when I come into the classroom is we co-create the expectation that we all need to abide by in that room. So because I'm an adult doesn't mean that I have a set of rules that I need to come with in that space. So one of the simple things that I would perhaps suggest in terms of creating a very democratized space where everybody's voice is directly involved in the decision-making of that space, which then has to also abide with the teacher. So even if the collective rule is that we're not allowed to be in a room 5 minutes late, even if the teacher is late, they have to do whatever it is that the collective expectation is, which is apologize or make some sort of atonement for that kind of action. If we all collectively decide we're not allowed to have phones in the room, that also has to be abided by with the adults in the room. So everything that we create has to be rooted in that. So using, trust building exercises, being able to create a space that's truly democratic and actually has everybody's voices valued and valuable in that room. Being able to create a space where, the emotions of every child is also centered. So I have a practice and a program where when they come into the room, they have to write how they feel on a card anonymously, and it has to be longer than a word. So then they put that into like a anonymous box, and therefore they are able to recognize that the emotions are valid and held. So actually, how can we create that within a classroom where everybody's voices and emotions are centered in a space where we don't just look at emotions as this separate thing that has nothing to do with academic engagement? Actually recognizing that when somebody's emotions are being centered, they're more likely to engage academically in a better and much more engaged way. So actually making us, so those are just some kind of, I guess, easily transposable kind of methodology that can be used from the 8 pillars of happiness that kind of informs the S.M.I.L.E-ing Boys principle. And yeah, I can send through, I guess, the breakdown of the methodology to Vanessa, and then she can cascade that onto you if you wanted to go into greater detail about that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to share any resources or further content that you have on our social media and as well as via email to our audience here. So we have a second question and kind of piggybacks off the first question. And this is from our student leaders from also the Empoderación en Educación project, Ivana and Christy. How can we as educators, student leaders in higher education help counter biases of Black men and Black boys as they enter academia and their careers?
Right, that's a really great question, Christy. Thank you so much for asking that, but also it's a very powerful question because I don't necessarily have all the answers around that, and I don't pretend to ever do that. But I think that one, the awareness of recognizing how deeply insidious the biases of Black men permeate through everything from the policies to the training process. So for example, in every possible way, making sure that's flagged. So for example, the school security, like what is the training they have of who they perceive to be unruly and disruptive? Because a Black person comes in wearing a hoodie, is that automatically policed around what they perceive that to be? In terms of the kind of curriculum and the body of work, who is reflected in that? Are the students involved in the co-design of a curricula that reflects their experiences? Who are the scholars that they are studying? What kinds of breadth of diversity exist in the curricula that actually allows for them to see themselves in a way that actually upholds their own sense of culture and value in that space? Recognizing that, even in some kind of, I guess the visual images that are used within kind of text and particular resources. A lot of it is still very, very colonial centered. A lot of it is still very white supremacist. A lot of it is still very unrepresentative of the demographic that's being taught. So actually recognizing that there's so many layers of this that is so insidiously permeated through education systems, looking at how diverse, schools are and the actual administrative bodies of the school, the lecturers in the school, like all of these things are like big questions, of course, but actually there are very kind of tangible things that can be done to, one, diversify the space, to allow for the kind of curricula to represent the diversities of students that are in that space, to allow for the voices of these students to be democratized in a way that they can actively see how their voices shape action, to empower students to be able to also challenge systems in a way that doesn't actually negatively impact them in terms of, sanctions and things of that nature. So there's a wide range of things, not one exhaustive list, of course, but I think there's a multitude of things. But the biggest thing is actually having the awareness and then empowering yourselves and having, a kind of, dean of faculty like, Vanessa, who's open to actually allowing those voices to be further amplified across the administrative chain so that those changes can actually be tangibly realized over time.
Absolutely. Thanks for those insights. And most definitely, and we can do this at all levels, from a student leadership level to, of course, administrative. So thank you for that. Okay, so we want to be mindful of everybody's schedule and of our guests. So we're going to conclude with this last question here in the chat box. And this question is from our Professor Efren Lopez, Dr. Lopez. Here, in terms of having your work exhibited, I wanted to ask if you could speak more to that process. Do you approach institutions, or have they approached you? Has anything surprised you, like pushback or embrace?
Wow, that's a really great question. Thank you so much, Dr. Efren Lopez. So I think there's two contexts, because I've done a lot of the work in the UK. At the moment, most schools get in touch with me and most higher educations do that. In LA, so I'm in conversation with UCLA and Cal State Long Beach because they're really interested in bringing the program to the school and curating an exhibition in the space and using that as an opportunity for wider discussions and dialogue with students and the entire kind of, faculties that are interested. So they've approached me because I set up an exhibition here in LA and I invited a lot of people to come through. So through that, I think the word got out. There's a lot of different educators that came to see that. And through that, they was like, we need this in our school. We need to get this in these kinds of spaces. So through the exhibitions that I've created, which in this particular case, was an exhibition that came as a result of me kind of working with a friend of mine who has a space here in downtown LA. So there's not really like one hard and fast rule as to how my engagement with higher education works. I obviously try and make sure that I put exhibitions in places that are accessible to the most people, and therefore people then get to come to it and they maybe share that with their friends who might be educators, and then they get in touch and say, we want this in our spaces. Has there been pushback? Historically, yes, I think because there's something on the face of this work that somewhat is radical. And even though the images are quite disarming, the fact that it's specifically about Black boys and it speaks to, especially in the context of America, because that's one of the most politicized aesthetics in this country, the fact that it's one of the most contested aesthetics around, police brutality and all that. So I think there is a pushback in terms of the politicization of Black imagery, especially Black men, and therefore some spaces wanting to present neutrality. And therefore there is that sort of kind of diplomacy around what they perhaps want the images to sit in their spaces like, and how they want to disguise their political cosign, whatever that might be. In terms of the embrace, I think, which is one of the reasons why I said I'm relocating to LA, because the embrace in the last couple of months has been quite breathtaking for me, because I think it speaks to a very poignant need, specifically in the last few months. The fact that just in LA alone, there's been over 3, murders of Black men under the police custody or police interactions in the last couple of just 6 weeks into the year so far, and that really, these images really speak into that particular emotional turmoil that I think Black people are constantly in this city, and ultimately, working in communities like South Central LA, which is obviously very much Black and brown, and ultimately the lack of resources that exist for those communities. And this work almost feeling like a hopeful sort of rainbow that actually allows for those young people and the educators in those spaces to see some sort of shining light that potentially can bring about some change for those young people in that space. So there's been this overwhelming embrace, and even older Black men seeing this as an opportunity for healing and really coming into those spaces with an open heart and open arms, and ultimately lots of emotion, because these images really set a template for kind of emotional exploration of even Black men and the distance that we have to the child in us, and how the society has posited us in this way under patriarchy. So yeah, I think that's perhaps my best response to your kind of really, really powerful question.
Absolutely. And with this question, we're going to conclude our session. So I do want to invite the audience to, provide just one last round of applause here virtually for our guest speaker, K. Rufai. So Kay, thank you so much for your brilliance, your excellence and talent. This was such an empowering session, to really say the least. So with this, we're going to conclude, but I want to go ahead and give you the last word. Anything that you would like to say before we end our session?
I think for me, it's just to empower us to be very cognizant of how the subconscious storytelling has already existed in our minds about Black boys particularly, and to continually use that consciousness to really engage in our interpersonal, our professional, and our everyday lives around the people that we engage with, and actually sometimes their own lack of knowledge or actually their conscious ignorance around a lot of this work, and to use this as a conduit to ultimately always provide space for them to really challenge themselves and to be accountable to themselves and to others around the kind of subconscious storytelling that already exists about Black boys and Black men in our society.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So with this, we're going to conclude our session. So we will be in contact, we will be in community and in solidarity. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank
here.
you. Yeah, thank you. Bye.